So thank you guys for coming back. We had a really full first session this evening, but I know you guys are really going to enjoy the second half. We've had a pretty incredible progression so far in terms of understanding some of the roots of what happened with early childhood trauma, understanding a lot of the science, understanding court and dependency cases, and now here we are understanding what happens when kids are in the system, the kind of programs that exist, the kind of challenges that happen with those programs. And we're very lucky today to have Ken Barrick here with us, and also to have Stephanie Stone here with us. And you're going to have to tell me your first and last name again.
I'm Bonnie Meyer.
Bonnie Meyer. And what we have here is a whole spectrum of folks from the architects to the, I would say, the builders maybe, and the materials. So we get to see how everything is made. Ken has been was the founder and CEO of Seneca Center that has been running so many programs it's really hard to keep track of across the Bay Area. He has served some of the most troubled youth in the Bay Area and has unrelentingly wanted to open his doors to these youth despite many behavioral issues that come out of the abuse that we've learned about here in class. And we're very happy to have him here today to tell us about Seneca, tell us about his vision and some of the challenges.
All right. Well, just a few prefacing remarks. I am going to kind of walk you through Seneca 1A, but the person that you're going to want to talk to is Stephanie, and I know that, so you're not going to embarrass me about that. I'm okay. Because Stephanie was in one of our group homes and then sort of grew up with us. And I must say I did a double take, because we haven't seen each other, and I remember her better as a little tiny child than I do as this grown-up adult. But I'll talk to you a little bit about what we are and why, but what we do. But before we do that, since we're such a small group, would you mind if we did just quick, like, who are you guys, where are you from, so I know who I'm talking to, just very briefly?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay, I'm Shannon Hovis, and I am a second year at the Golden School of Public Policy, so I'm getting my master's there. And I'm a former teacher.
I'm Hope Richardson. I'm also a second year at the Golden School of Public Policy.
Jason Woods, first year in the School of Social Welfare.
Chris Colorado, first year, social work.
For everyone else, I'm Jenny Ventura, second year in the School of Social Welfare. Wendy, second year in the School of Social Welfare.
Oh, sorry. I'm Margaret. I'm an undergrad studying theater and English with an interest in advocacy journalism.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a second year graduate student at the School of Journalism.
Hey.
That's welcome back there.
They all know who.
I'm Christina. I'm visiting for the school.
I'm Tatiana Carmelelli. I'm the first year student here at the Graduate School of Journalism, pursuing law and
Okay.
Orville Thomas, first year public policy grad student, background in news reporting.
I'm Anna Jacoby. I am a first year social welfare. I'm going to last week at Catholic.
I'm Melanie Schmidt, and I'm a first year social welfare student.
Hi, I'm Rishi Ahuja. I'm an undergraduate student in political science and economics.
I'm Annabelle Gunkel, and I'm undergrad in communications.
So lots of folks that are not social welfare background, but related fields. So I'm gonna kind of I do know though that you've already had the 1A of why is a child removed from their home? What are those basics? But then let me tell you why an organization like Seneca comes to be. I started my career, I was a counselor, and I worked in a group home that was supposed to be for emotionally disturbed kids, right? For kids who were pretty seriously troubled, kids who had often as many as 6, 7, 8 placements before they came to us. There was a place called Ried West in Sacramento. It's now called River Oaks Center for Children. And I had worked there for a couple years. I worked in the group home first, then moved over to the school. When we got a referral for a 7-year-old, so not much older than you were when you came to us. And this 7-year-old was supposed to be the kid from hell, right? The most troubled, the most abused, the most neglected child that they had ever seen. And you know, when you do this work, you see this paperwork. There's something that particularly the public policy people should know. If you're a good social worker and you want an expensive placement, what do you have to do? Right? What does the paperwork have to say about the child? The more expensive the placement, the more the paperwork has to justify the level of care. So if you're just a depressed kid that's not hurting anybody, you're probably not going to get a really high level of service. So we often saw paperwork that said, this is a really troubled kid. This kid is so aggressive. This kid acts out. And then they would come into our classroom and they'd be, it's a clinical term, cream puffs. Chronic undifferentiated cream puffs, very sweet cream puffs. We had a whole series of diagnostic categories about cream puffs. So we read the paperwork as we always did. This kid was unusual in that the abuse he experience was really, really awful. Cigarette burns all over his body, broken bones, most of which had happened before he was 3. So it was interesting. I happened to sit in on the session with the folks from LA where they brought those horrendous pictures of abuse. Okay, those are unusual. That's not what you usually see. Usually it's a really tough call. But this particular boy had had that kind of an experience. Well, he came into the classroom and he was everything his paperwork said and then some. We were holding on to that boy sometimes for 2 hours at a time, and that was happening sometimes 2 and 3 hours in a 5-hour school day, 2 or 3 times. So 5 or 6 hours of actually literally physically holding on to this boy. And when you get a kid like that in your classroom, something interesting happens, which is that not only is he troubled, but your whole classroom falls apart. So we were a pretty confident team with a classroom that was completely falling apart. And we weren't sure what we were going to do. We tried varying his treatment plan, it didn't work. And then somebody decided to intervene with him with these hand puppets, because he didn't speak to any of the kids or adults in the class. And the hand puppets got out once when he was really starting to escalate. And the hand puppet said, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" A kid that never spoke to anybody. And he looked at the hand puppet and he said, whispered. And the hand puppet said, "Who's going to get you?" And he looked away from the hand puppet at the person working the hand puppet and said, "She's going to get me. Like, you idiot, didn't you read the paperwork?" The kids all know that when they know their background, they know their history, of course. Right? Their therapists are talking to them about it. By now, all 3 of the staff in the room were engaged in this interaction. And somebody didn't stay in the role play and said, "Nobody's going to get you. We're going to protect you." And he looked from one to the other of us. And he said, "You can't protect me." And then you get to see who this kid is, right? And what's really underneath all the acting out and all the frustration, because believe me, we wanted to kick this kid out of our class so bad. Because again, our whole class was falling apart. But you have that experience, and it's a formative experience, both for the child and the staff, and we just hung in there with it. And here's where, in the movies, the music plays, right? And you cut to him walking, him as the valedictorian, right? And he's saying, "I want to thank Ken Barrett. Yeah, not so much. It doesn't really work that way. But incrementally, bit by bit, he did get better. He got better to the point where he was sitting through the class the whole day. And the students were like, "Yay," right? There's a reason for the story, bear with me. And then one night in the group home on one awake shift, he was out of control. He was taken from there to a hospital. And from there, he was taken directly to Napa State Hospital, which was at that time, a locked psychiatric unit for kids in California. And he was raised there until he was 17 years old. So he spent most of his young life in a locked psychiatric facility. And when he was taken, I was so mad I was fit to be taught. And I said that if I ever ran a place, I never planned on running the children's agency, that I wouldn't do that. So the reason for this story, and this is a story I tell every new staff person that comes in, is that Seneca was founded on the idea of unconditional care. Seneca was founded on a very simple idea that we would try to accept kids into the system, into our system, and not kick them out for any reason. Now, Stephanie can tell you that that's less than a perfect idea, but it's an aspiration. So what happened was that Seneca grew up from a group home and a school to a whole system of care that went from group homes for kids in the community, to schools, to public school-based services, to a therapeutic preschool, to a locked psychiatric facility, and then very broadly to community-based services, and to very, very individualized community-based services. So what do I mean by that? There are certain services that I think of as creative services and services that I think of as less creative services. It's not a surprise to any of you, whether you're in journalism or in social welfare, that services that come in a box, here's the service, does the child fit, don't necessarily work very well for kids that come from very diverse backgrounds. But in the last 10 years, we've been able to create services that are very, very individualized, that start with where the child is, move to where their family is, and create a whole support system. When Stephanie started with us, we not only did we not have that service available, we didn't even have the ability to transition a child into our own foster. So a child would be in our group home, they would be doing better, and she was like super easy. We really were by our standards. And then we'd look for a place, and if their parents weren't ready to take them, we couldn't send services out to support their parents. We had no constellation to find extended family. We had no ability to develop our own foster parents, and we couldn't even support foster parents in the community with people that knew and loved our kids. So we just tried to keep them, frankly. And the more you get attached to them, the more you try to keep them. Right? But raising a kid in a group home is just a fundamentally flawed idea. It's a fundamentally flawed idea. So then you start building out all of these systems. And that's where we are now. So in some counties, like San Francisco, we have a very comprehensive series of services where we can go all the way up to locked psychiatric if we need to for short periods of time, where we can support kids and families, where we have a very robust family finding function that searches out where kids are anywhere in the country and brings in support systems. In other counties, we're more in the education system. We don't have all aspects. And in Southern California and Monterey, we do mostly adoptions and haven't even moved into the highest ends of the service system yet. So that's sort of the nutshell of overall Seneca. I'm going to stop there and see if you guys have questions. Yeah.
Actually, I'm really interested. I guess the person that used the hand topic, is that a strategy that they used before, or did that just came to mind? Or?
It was desperation. I skipped a lot of the stuff. We tried everything with this kid. We tried our traditional program and it failed miserably. We tried ignoring the escalated behaviors, and we actually ran into the classroom next door and assaulted one of their kids. And they said they came to us after school and said that intervention wasn't working for their class very well, as you can guess, right? I mean, and basically it was one very creative person that had some experience with using expressive arts therapy that said, let's try this. And believe me, even then, I mean, we probably tried it 6 or 7 times before we got, she's going to get me out of this kid. I mean, there are kids that are really, really defended. Imagine being a 6-year-old who had I believe he had 7 or 8 placements fail him before he came to us, right? And then he comes in and we're saying, we really want you to bond and attach with us. You'd have to be a lunatic, right? I mean, every time this kid showed somebody who he really was and gave them an opportunity to work through that with him, they kicked him out. right? Because that was the hard stuff. And it's not going to come as a surprise to any of you. That's the hard stuff for all of us too, right? It's not the first 5 dates. Right? So layer on tremendous abuse in this boy's case, significant neglect, a profoundly mentally ill mom who was never fully treated, right? And then say, okay, we're going to take you through 4 foster homes and 3 group homes before we get you to a level of care that will even keep you. And then you still have the chance of being kicked out of there, right? And again, that was the whole founding premise of Seneca, is just the statement that we will keep you no matter what was powerful in and of itself. That we'll work through this with you. And I always want to make this an adult analogy too. When someone says to you, I will stay with you no matter what, why do you think we're having such a debate about gay marriage? People want the contract signed, right? And kids need that far more than most adults. And yet, once you move into the foster care system, and it is better now than it was when you came to us, no one ever makes you that guarantee until you're adopted, right? And we did not, horrible mistake, we did not pay much attention to adoption. We felt like the adult saying that I'm going to make a commitment to you was enough. I tried that before I got married. I'm committed to you. Yeah, not so much. I want your property if you die. Right. I talked a little bit.
Well, I don't really know what you guys want to hear from me, so I thought I'd give you a basic overview and then open up for questions. So I was in foster care from the time I was 3 to 16. Before I came to Seneca at 5, I went through about 4 different placements. I was in the group home at 5, and then I went to a foster care home from 6, and then I was in 2 foster care homes through Seneca, and then I left on my own when I was 16. I am married now. I have 4 kids. We live far away from here. So, and I work and I go to school. So that's the basic about me. If you have any, questions that you're specific about, go ahead and ask. Nobody?
I do. Okay.
Go ahead.
Tell me what the best part of your experience with Seneca was.
Honestly, this woman. This is Bonnie. She was a counselor.
Imagine my surprise.
She was a counselor that worked with me from, 6.
Well, I worked, I'm Bonnie. And when I first started at Seneca in '91, I was in the after-school program, and she was one of the kids that I had taught in the after-school program. And then I also worked in the boys' group home, and sometimes would work in her group home. And then when the intensive treatment foster care program opened up, she was one of the first kids to go to that program. And then about very shortly after I joined that program, and then your foster brother was one that I worked with. And then so we were kind of along the same path, but I didn't really work with her officially. And then we did start working together. Yeah.
So I've known her since I was 6. She's been there through everything. She's been there, never judgmental. She's always been my rock. So
Cheerleader. I've been your
you
cheerleader.
weren't supposed to get as close with a child the way she did. She really broke the rules, and we kind of kept it quiet. But it really worked in my case.
Well, I think it wasn't until later, when you were
Once
kind
I
of
got
going
older.
through your teenage
Right.
stuff.
But she was always there. If I needed a question answered, she was there. She always stayed with me. She was there without my parents. My parents were kind of there, but they weren't. So she's kind of like my mom in a way. She's been there through all of my pregnancies, my husband, my kids, just everything. And the constant is what worked for me. And a lot of kids don't have that. So
But,
that's
and
what worked.
I've worked with many kids, and she's the only one that has really sought me out. And her biggest thing was she really wanted a family, and so that was her big push to become a family. And now that she's older, we talk about parenting stuff. I have a 17-year-old, so what did you do when your son was this age, or is this So we do a lot of I'm that figure that she bounces ideas off of.
So I think we have some questions, yeah?
Can I ask a question about what made you break the rules in this situation?
It just what just like what Ken was saying, sometimes you just have to go a little bit outside the box to give a person what they really need, and yeah.
How did Seneca respond? Like, was it positively supported, or was it like a slap on the wrist? Because I know.
There was no. I think that Stephanie's.
Maybe I worded it.
Yeah.
She wasn't supposed to get as involved, like with me coming over to her house to meet her parents, to meet,
But that was kind of after you left Seneca, though.
No.
Really?
I remember there was rules like you shouldn't have, brought me around so much. Like you were supposed to be there in my life, but not really be introduced into your life.
Right.
But we kind of crossed over a little bit, I don't think
We
it was
lived
like
in the
big.
same town.
It wasn't
Her foster
nothing.
family was right near my home.
But they
So-
kind of like took me and like I was, I've known her for so long. When she was pregnant and her husband, we would go out for ice cream sometimes with Sean.
Yeah.
And it was like little stuff like that might not have been, okay to do. We did, and it just really bonded us, and we stayed, bonded, and up until now.
And I guess that might also be a question for Ken is how do you make an exception the rule? And hard to know what worked here explicitly,
But it might not work for other people. A lot of counselors may not want to do that. Maybe some kids don't want to do that. Maybe they don't want to get so close to people. But us, we just have such a great connection that it was. I don't think it was a hard thing. I think it just kind of, went the way it went.
So, early along, and you were sort of mid-early, but really early, when there were 12 of us and 12 kids, each one of us ended up raising a group of kids.
Yeah.
And the kids chose, you can choose all day long, but the kids chose the people that were their special people. And we just ended up, if you're breathing, you stay in their lives, right? And then, and I told Daniel about this, and I was hesitating whether I was going to tell the group, but it's really appropriate. And then about 14 years ago, one of our male counselors had sex with a 16-year-old girl, and that became a huge issue, and the media picked it up for you journalism students, and it was front page news. And it made national news because of the circumstances, which were egregious. This guy was, let's see, another clinical term, slime dog from hell. And it became so intensified. I got a call from an AP reporter who said, do you think that there's going to be a criminal prosecution? And I said, yeah, there is. We're all involved, and we are going after this, and we're cooperating and trying to, we think this guy should go to jail. And he said, I didn't mean him, I meant you. Yeah, that I was breathless. Like, I didn't have sex with this kid. I'm trying to put the guy in jail. But the implication was that I was responsible. So then we went through the era of boundaries, right? The era of reacting to that. You will, if you ever see a child outside of this place, and by the way, he had sex with her in the facility. So, all these rules are so hard to monitor, right? But it's really interesting for the journalism folks how a story takes on a life of its own. And the who we were and the work we did was completely lost in the story, to the degree that the reporter, by the way, the guy that's still around, his name's Bob Gammon. Anybody? I think he works for
TV reporter?
No, Gammon. The East Bay Express.
Oh, okay.
He's a good writer, unfortunately. But at the end of it, Bob wrote an article that he put on the front page of the local section saying, "Agency maintains reputation despite scandal." So he actually did recognize it, but man, we had so much, there was so much damage done to the agency that I wasn't sure we would survive it, right? So it's interesting how the journalism side can affect practice in such dramatic ways. Well, then a number of years later, we decided that we wanted to get a place at a closing military base. And some of the same media people that had been so hard on us during that sort of picked up our cause. And there's some of those news pieces you got. And we got just positive press after positive press. So it's interesting because what I thought was not going to be survivable in the press ended up actually becoming quite neutral over time as people got to know us. So go ahead.
Yeah, just, I mean, in terms of, did we get into this discussion before? We must have gotten into this discussion before. It happens all the time, but kind of, at the top of a public child welfare administration, bad press associated to a kind of tragedy or isolated incident that has no bearing on the leadership of the person, really, becomes the guillotine for that person. So you kind of got a feeling of that. So, I mean, you were in a private situation, so you were able to interact with the press in a way that the public is not. I mean, were you very proactive?
Well, that's really interesting. So I met with 2 different media consultants because I had never had an experience like this before. One of them said, write a statement, don't ever talk to a press person, don't. And I followed that advice for almost 2 months. And it was one of the worst mistakes of my professional career. Yeah, it was just terrible advice. I'm sure I paid him like a bunch of money too. The guy was just dumber than mud. Really, I didn't tell you his name, so. And then I met with someone else that said, you are a compelling organization with a compelling story. And even this, because a number of the staff discovered this and brought it forward with great courage, and then stayed with us and stood with us through it, right? And that should have been a story, right? These people that finally brought it to me, that finally helped us deal with the situation. We started talking, I started talking to the press. Actually, not we, I'm the only person. The other thing I learned is I'm the only person from my organization that can talk to the press. And started engaging them in what we were trying to do and why things happen. And this area that Stephanie brought out is creating real relationships. The closer the relationships, the more freedom you allow those relationships, the more risk you take. And initially we weren't risk averse at all. I mean, kids were coming home with us for Christmas. We just closed at Christmas and everybody took a kid. It's like, because no kid was going to be in the group home at Christmas, not ever, right? And they were going to be integrated into our families. We got pretty big for that, and I got way too scared for that, and that's when we moved into these new initiatives around permanency. Like if you had been with us now, the first thing, especially at your age, is we would have searched the whole country to find out every extended family member you had or ever had, and even if you didn't go live with them, you would have known and been attached to them. And that's a practice that was taught to us by Kevin Campbell. Because it's more complicated than it sounds like. But you came here and we didn't know how to do that.
That was one thing I'd like to say. In Stephanie's case, there was 2 separate agencies that had, she was at Seneca and then her siblings were at another placement. And we had a hard time getting them together.
Where were they?
Yeah.
They were Gammas first.
Yeah.
They came to Seneca years later.
Yeah.
And these were foster, so this is under the, but they were the Family First is a foster family agency.
Right.
So they were getting money from the county. Yeah, okay.
But in those early, again, now, in those earlier years, we had this idea that we were going to sort of become surrogate family for the kids, which again, in and of itself was absurd. And so the level of importance on visiting family, visiting sibling, extended family, we didn't hold it at that level of value. And in the field, it was not. In the field, there was this kind of, we're rescuing these kids from their family. It was sort of the undertone. Yeah, you're shaking your head, good. Good. It was a really bad idea. And at the same time, creating an extended family is a really good idea. And so we started thinking a lot about that, about how you create support systems. The biggest thing that changed is that someone who you would remember, who I don't have permission to say her name, who was very, very close with us and her kids. She had kids. And her kids became literally and the person I started Seneca's with foster kids. Although by then we knew a little bit about boundaries, so we insisted we've got to be certified as foster parents, we have to be monitored, we're not just going to take them informally because you have to be protected and we have to be protected. And then, I think that was one of the big places where my view changed because I would get mad at the kids' parents when we first started. But now this was my kid, right? This is somebody that I had raised from the time she was 9 years old. And I mean literally, when we started, we were all in the group home with the kids all the time. And these were her kids, so it was more like my grandkids. So it was much harder for me to be mad at her because I knew everything she had been through. I knew everything about her experience. I knew what happened. I knew the guys she was getting involved with, for better or for worse, right? Much more like the experience of a parent. And so when her kids got in trouble, separating her kids from her was something we would have never, and separating the siblings from each other was something we would have never considered. And then you get this kind of, and then with my kids, I mean, if anybody ever tried to separate my kids, I would hunt them down and kill them, right? Not really. Did you get that on tape? That was a joke.
That's a great point, and what that's a great question for Stephanie is where is she at with her parents? Her biological parents.
Well, I always had visitation with my parents, so I knew who they were, and they just didn't live with them. I'm in contact with my parents like I always have been. They're not doing as well as I am, but I'm not in a great relationship with my siblings because we weren't raised together. So, for being raised in different foster homes and different agencies, they don't allow you to bond with the people that you need to bond with. So when we became adults, we tried to bond together on our own. And it didn't really work because we didn't, learn how to fight and to make up with each other and know that, you're my sister, you're my brother. This is normal to fight, and then we get over it. So instead of working with the issues, they just leave. And then, they tell you, you're not my sister, no more. And they just kind of disassociate themselves from you. So that's hard because you want that family unit, but you don't have it.
There's a couple questions in there. We got 1, and then 2, and 3.
And just continuing on relationships, I just am wondering who then from your childhood are you still close with, and are you still close
You have, what childhood? My foster parents, my friends,
Yeah, I guess considering like whoever was.
Besides my parents, I don't really, my brother and sister I try to talk to, we don't talk to very well, a lot. I have Bonnie.
But your foster family's not?
I talk to my foster family every once in a while, but I left on such bad terms that that relationship kind of got broken. And it was my fault, by the way. It wasn't their fault. But yeah, it's kind of broken beyond repair, so we don't talk as much.
Yeah, on the same kind of token, a trend that I'm seeing is that oftentimes individuals are bounced around before they're given the real help they need in situations like Seneca Center. And I mean, that additional movement, that lack of consistency definitely adds to the trauma that individuals are going through. How can we better identify the individuals at a younger age that really need this help and avoid this kind of process that's harming them additionally, where they can find that consistency and those people like Bonnie that they really need in their lives?
It's long term. You can't say, you know, I came in at 5 and then you work with me until I'm 18 and, you know, send me out into the world and expect me to thrive. You have to, it's an ongoing thing. You can't, you know, the foster care system kind of just, you know, throws kids out, not out, but, you know, off into the world, and then where's that support? You have to learn it. You have to learn the skills. So I'm not really sure because everyone's different, but with me, it was the consistency of somebody who was really there unconditionally. And that's what every kid needs, is they need to know that they have someone that they can trust and always go to.
So, Steph, I want to be clear that she really did have caring foster parents.
I did. They were great.
And they had taught you, I don't think that you would be the parent that you are with your own kids. No. And she has 4, so she's like, I don't think I can do 4. I got 1, and she does it beautifully. She's structured, she's organized, she's loving, and I think that comes from Ruby and Rich.
It does.
Yeah.
Definitely. You can't be a foster parent unless you really want to. You really want to help that kid. Not anybody can do it. You really have to be a motivated person and love and really want to help. And I have those foster parents. And they really treated me. They wanted to adopt me, but I said no because I thought I was betraying my family. But they took me in. I had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. 2 of them actually went to Berkeley. So they treated me as their kid. I had the same rules. They didn't, they weren't too careful with my emotions. They wanted me to not be treated like a foster kid. They wanted me to be their kid. I had the same rules as they did. They respected my wishes. They helped me in any decision that I wanted. So they really formed me, and they were wonderful. And so I really take, the way that I was raised through them and the way I want to live my life.
Part of the thing that we do here is we're trying to find a lot of different stories. Just from your narratives, you've given me so many different ideas. If you were to introspectively look, what would you like to be talked about in a larger context for communities in terms of foster care? What they need
Well, I think people need to be educated on the whole foster care system and kids. A lot of people don't understand why kids are in foster care. A lot of people think that it's the child's fault. What did they do? Why are you taken away from your family? So they need to be educated and know that the children need help. That they don't need to be looked at as, you're a foster kid, you're going to have issues, you're not going to make it in life. They need to be looked at as, someone that needs help, but in a respectful, dignified way. Teach them, guide them the right way. Don't just stick them as, you're a foster kid, you're a problem, don't go from their past. Give them a future to look at. Give them a path to go on. Give them expectations. Let them know that you expect good things from them. That's, they need that. Kids need that.
Okay, so one topic that really hasn't really sparked my interest since we started talking about it last week was this issue about open dependency courts. And I was wondering what access did you have to your history when you were younger? And that's the first question.
Okay.
And then secondly, I just wanted to get your opinion on how do you feel about dependency courts becoming open to media and,
Okay.
so it's going on the point.
So, yes, that's right. When I was 12 years old, the social worker finally let me read my reports. And then I was able to read them and to let them know what was okay, what was truthful in there, and you know, some things seemed to be changed. I don't believe they should ever be opened because you've got privacy issues, you've got children that have emotional problems, and you don't want to add to them. You don't want people to, you know, you don't want people to have access to how a child is when he or she is a child. I think it kind of has a longing effect that might be negative on, you know, some kids. The whole report thing. Social workers meet with children twice a year for 20 to 30 minutes. These people are writing reports that that change a kid's life. They report. It's the same report taken maybe a few sentences here or there, and then they push it through. And that's what
counties. So
right. I don't know if there, how many different county workers, but that report is that child's like lifeline. You're telling the judge, this is how this kid is. This is what needs to happen with this kid, and they're not spending time with that kid. They're not talking to people that interact with that kid on a day-to-day basis. For me, when I would meet with the counselor or, you know, the worker who wrote the report, I was angry. I didn't want to speak with her. I didn't want to be involved in the whole, I was embarrassed to be a foster kid. So she would see the defiance in me. She would, you know, she wouldn't see anything positive in me because she met with me for 20, 30 minutes every 6 months, and that's what went into the report. So I think the reports, they need to be written out better, but they definitely need to stay closed.
You said that you had access to like your childhood. Like,
Once you were 12, you were able to read the reports. I don't know how it is now, but that's how it was then. I don't remember really anything that I read, but I did have access and I did read some stuff.
There's some more hands. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I have a question more about when you leave the foster care system, in terms of what are some of the things that you did to cope with the fact that these wraparound services were no longer available. When you're, even if it's spotty, when you're in a group home setting, you talk to someone, or there are counselors, there are social workers, and what happens specifically for you when you left and those services aren't there anymore.
I don't know what services there are because instead of leaving normally how you would exit out of the system, I left on my own. So there was no resources made to me. Ken might be able to tell you more about that.
Well, let's talk about what leaving on your own is first. So
I ran away. That's what living on my own means.
It's actually a fairly different world now than when Stephanie was with us. If I recall, you were one of the first kids to go into the.
I think I was the third.
Yeah. So we had to. There was no intensive treatment foster care in California. Period. We literally had to write a law to get a foster care program created, and it was a pilot. And apparently, you were child number 3 in the pilot. And we used to call it Sarah's Law just internally because there was a kid very much like Stephanie who should have never been in a group home. Stephanie would never be in a group home today. You would have never ever gotten to a group home. So there's a whole constellation of services, including AB 12, that says that you can get services afterward. The other thing that, after age 18 and over. So there's a whole different constellation of services that are available now. Even if she had not emancipated herself. Once she turned 18, there would have been nothing. She would have fallen off the edge of the earth. Now, what we hoped was that the foster parents in the program would adopt their kids. That was always in the back of my mind. Because we never thought that the kids were going to go home. by the time they got to our level of care, very few of them did. But that turned out to be a lot more complicated than we thought. Because the kids didn't always choose the foster parents. Listen to the language you use even now. It was your fault.
Well, it really was.
You were 16,
Yeah,
for God's sake.
yeah.
By definition, it can't be your fault. Right? I mean, God, I have no idea what my kids are going to do to me when they're 16, but it's going to be my job to take it, right?
Well, see, that's the difference between being a foster parent and dealing with teenage issues. You have the choice to send them away, or we have the choice, we could run away. It's not like, if my kids did what I, did when I was 16, they wouldn't be able to leave. I would not let them leave. I would support them in their decisions, and I couldn't just send them away and go, oh, the problem's done with. That's the problem in foster care, is the foster parents have that option. They can just send the kids away, and then they don't have that problem to deal with anymore. So
I want to see if I can get to your question. Now, there is a constellation of services that are available. The question is, are they the right services and the services that youth want and need, and is there enough of them? And the answer to both of those are no.
okay.
But at least there are some other avenues available.
I just would love just to, we're talking about the work you're dealing with kids who are coming in after multiple placement moves and things like that. You've alluded to this drop in the usage of group homes, that's been a trend for a number of years now. So I'm just kind of wondering, in terms of like global numbers, how does it break down in terms of different types of foster care placements in California?
Well, if I see, this is where I need Jill. If I'm correct, for example, LA, I think they said their total numbers of foster care have cut in about half.
Sure. Well, yeah.
And I think that those numbers have been roughly reflected through the system. So I think there's about 60-65%, and let me get this for you exactly, because we have these numbers. The number of kids that were in group care are currently in group care. It may be even less than that. Interestingly enough, the combined number of kids, 60-65% of the kids that from the peak in when was the peak? Thank you. I could just turn to you.
Jill went over the numbers today.
Can you guys help me here?
35% kinship care.
Yeah. 65%.
35.
Okay.
And then less than 10 in group, now it's 8% group, 6 to 8% in group home. What is the, she percentage?
But the percentage of kids within the system in group care has stayed about constant, interestingly enough.
It's just gone down.
It's just that the total number of kids in the system have gone down, and so the number of kids in group care have gone down.
So 35% and the rest are foster care?
Some are FFA and the rest are foster home.
FFA in Summer County?
It's placed by a foster,
No, a non-profit agency.
a non-profit agency.
FFA is how much percentage?
I don't know.
We'll send you the slide.
It's
very nice.
If I remember correctly, FFA are roughly half the kids that live in non-relative county foster care are. So the kinship is the lion's share at what percentage?
It's 35 kinship, 10% foster care, 28% FFA, and 6%.
Okay, so actually that's actually a new number to me. So it used to be that the number of kids in county foster care versus FFA were roughly equal, and it sounds like that's now gone to a 2-to-1 ratio.
Well, the FFAs have been blowing up. I mean, they kind of started taking more of a share, especially in rural counties.
Yeah,
I did a story about that. It was blowing up in rural counties. Thanks. I just wanted to
I guess my question was sort of like what you were saying, Stephanie. Because I mean, when I was working with foster youth, there was like 3 boys that I was really attached to, and like they told me the story like they didn't want to get adopted either. Like I don't want to get adopted, and they were perfectly comfortable living in a group home. I mean, I worked with them when they came from college, and so I guess sort of my question is, I guess for y'all too, is kind of like at what point I'm not to promote group homes, but I just allow them to do this to be raised in a group home. Like these boys, they were like, we just love it here. I mean, He knew the staff, knew everyone there, and they just didn't want to leave.
But you worked in a really good group home.
Well,
Group homes are horrible in my experience.
I mean, knowing the data, knowing like the research, is like, yeah, we don't want to be in a group home, but they're like, no, we love it here. And when I used to go visit them there, it was always amazing. Like, they actually, I mean, they just had a great staff there.
That's been my experience in the Seneca group homes as well. And I think part of it's just fear of like, that's the first place they're stable and the first place that they feel like people care about them, even though they have their challenges and even though that they're struggling, and that, you know, their big buddy, you know, house manager is going to come give them a hug even after they've thrown stuff at them or something.
It's interesting too that the same kids that say I don't want to be adopted, if you with a relationship with them said, so if I want to do it, which I would obviously recommend, but if you said, so if I wanted to adopt you, you wouldn't want to do that. I'd say, you think about that. You know, it's not, I mean, it's like saying, do you want to get married? To whom? Right? I mean, you know, this whole assumption that you're, we tried so hard to manage kids with foster parents, and it is at best a hit or miss endeavor, no matter how hard you try. And, you know.
Everybody wants to belong somewhere.
But the kids always choose their people. Always. And that's where some of the institutional barriers become a real problem. I had two different kids that asked me to adopt them, and I would have had to. This was early in my career, and I would have at that time had to leave the agency to adopt those kids. And even then, I thought seriously about it because they were good matches for our family.
So I had a question regarding Stephanie's experience or understanding of social workers and their influence over her life. I was wondering, for you, Ken, how, in your experience, is that typical that social workers will, you know, only see a child for a very limited time and then write a report, and that report holds a lot of power over, like, what happens to them? And then, like, a follow-up question would be, I mean, that in itself would be something, you know, a potential story for, you know, a news outlet to shine light on, you know, the situation and try to get it changed at a policy level. But I'm wondering, like, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, in my mind, that's not, the story isn't that. The story is the variance in practice across the street, across the state. The variance in practice is stunning from county to county. And we have counties that work with Marin County, they know every one of their kids. I mean, they know every one of their kids. And they are detail oriented. So when we're working with them, they hold us and we hold them mutually to a very high standard. There are other counties that I work with that they have no idea. When you look at, Stephanie says that they write reports. They don't write those reports.
Exactly. Like I said, it's the same report, but they take out a few sentences and they replace them with a few sentences, and they call that their report, and that needs to change.
What is their
or they take the report that a social worker from the FFA writes.
Yes.
And they modify it. So it really, the practice varies enormously. I've worked with some absolutely superb county workers and county managers, and I've worked with some who I wouldn't let care for my dog.
And it's very sad because you're dealing with not just a person's life, a child's life.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do you do, or does your agency have any kind of role to play in policy making, and how do you take your experiences working across all of these counties and this issue that you're saying, how does that get fed, or how do you influence policymakers?
Well, first, we assume when a child's with us that we're responsible for that child. And that's always been kind of a feature, for better or for worse, sometimes for worse. We've been accused of not partnering well in some situations. But so we assume that we have a certain amount of responsibility. So that's a little bit different. In terms of working with policymakers, my push is and has always been that if you're going to use a private nonprofit, that they should have pretty comprehensive ability to serve kids across a number of different settings. And so, this is, again, we had none of this ability. We had just created the foster care program. I have no idea. Well, again, first of all, you would never, ever go into a group home. I mean, I still to this day don't really fully understand why we landed in a group. But if you were at Seneca now, you would have gone into wraparound, you would have tried to work with your family first and tried to work with your extended family. And if that didn't work, we would have gone to foster care with a pretty broadly based support system. We've been able, wraparound, excuse me, was a pretty broadly based support system. We've been able to get an agreement with our counties that in a wraparound program, even if a child is stable, that they can bounce back in. So the foster parent or the parent can simply call and re-enter the child into the program. And you would think that would be a really expensive intervention, but when we started telling our staff that the county was going to allow us to do that, guess what happened? Our lengths of stay in wraparound went down. Why do you think that?
Because they knew it would be okay. If they had problems.
The staff wouldn't let them go. That's right. Yeah, the staff wouldn't let them go. Kids were ready to go. Kids were doing fine. But the staff were so afraid that something bad was going to happen, they wouldn't be able to serve them, that they'd say, well, we just another month. I know they see you stay around. Right? So those kinds of systems are the kinds of policy changes that need to be made. If you decide you're going to adopt that young man, you may still need a home, by the way, just in case. So if you adopt it, there should be an array of support that's available to you on demand from the time you take that child until the time that child's independent. And it's the same commitment that parents should make when they decide to have a child, right? That you have a responsibility to that child. And many of us have the privilege of having parents that take responsibility in that way. The state does not and never has. Which leads you to the question, why do they think they should have the ability to take kids if they're not willing to make the same commitment they expect of a parent? It sounds schmaltzy, but it's very real.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
A question for Stephanie. Would you consider being a foster parent?
Absolutely. I would, because I know
Tell me that.
I have the great advantage of knowing where that child's coming from, and then being a parent, so I can really help a child in that situation. I believe I would be a great role model because they can see, look, I look where I'm at, I'm a foster kid, but I can be, a lawyer, I can be a teacher, I can be whatever I want because look, my foster mom did it. So I absolutely would.
I want to go back to when you're talking about wraparound services. I worked a lot in wraparound, and I believe in wraparound services.
Will you explain what it is for folks who are not?
It's kind of like the front end line. So basically, you're wrapping around services to keep children in their placement, usually in their biological homes. But I've done wraparound services in foster care.
So a report's been made, and they've decided then that the best way to help this kid is not to move them, but rather than services.
Or more typically, a child has gone to group care and they want to try to be able to help them get into a home. And so you take the very intensive services and move them with the child. So it can be at either end.
So I guess I'm wondering, there's a ton of research of the successful rates of this program, and I'm wondering what you think the barriers are to kind of initiating that program in every county, because I know there's only certain counties that are like mandating RAP within them, and so I'm just kind of wondering what the barriers are.
No, it's expensive. That's the biggest barrier. It's an expensive service. And the better you do it, they're now all over the state, especially with realignment. You guys have talked about realignment, right?
Good. We're trying to figure it out. You know, I mean, Francisco's our like lead investigator. He knows everything about it.
Great. Well, maybe you can fill me in afterwards. But the basic concept of realignment is funding that used to be drawn down from the state and federal government, primarily the state, is given to the county as a lump, and then they have to manage it, so they can't draw down extra money. That's the basic idea. So instead of me saying, if you want services for Bonnie, I'll give you 60 cents on the dollar and you provide 40 cents, you say, I'll just give you the dollar and you provide all the services. So if Bonnie's a good steward, she'll try to get services out. If she's not such a good steward, she'll try to keep as much of the money internal as she can. And Alameda is on what's called a 4E waiver, and they get the federal share all at once too. So hypothetically, that could create access to service in a very flexible way, because it used to be the only thing we could get reimbursed for was out-of-home care. But it doesn't necessarily play that way. And even with RAP, there are huge variations across the city on what RAP even means. So there are some counties that provide a full, robust wraparound program, and other counties that provide what we call saran wrap.
Yeah.
It's very, very thin, and it has very limited services.
That's a good title for a story.
And I can tell you who to write about too. Are you still recording this? No, I can't tell you who to write about. So that in and of itself is creating a different kind of barrier, because I would rather counties didn't do it at all than claim that they were doing wraparound. And the wraparound isn't robust enough to keep kids stable where they're placed. So it's a really complicated issue, and made more complicated by realignment. Is that at all coherent?
Yeah, and I guess that's fine. I guess I'm just wondering too, how do you believe in pushing that money to the front end and that those services are beneficial? And if you believe that, then how do we push those policies forward?
No, I don't. Not in the same way that some of my colleagues do. And this is where, thank goodness, my wife and I are very closely aligned. You asked the question. How do we set it up so that a kid gets what they need when they need it? And the idea of pushing services up front, there are kids who should go to group care, and they should go to group care now. Because even though I've become less and less a proponent of group care, I would take a really, really intensive, high-quality group care program for a short time, 10 times, rather than having a kid experience a foster home after foster home and a group home after group home failing. And every time that happens, the kid feels like they did something wrong.
I still have abandonment issues, trust issues, love issues. When you grow up this way, you start to wonder why people like you. What do they want from me in terms of, what do they get out of this relationship? So you really struggle with the abandonment a big time, and I did something wrong, they don't want me anymore. So the kids are learning that, home after home after home, and then it ends up going, to their adulthood, and it lingers and it stays, and you have to really work on it.
You have to get a really good husband.
Yes, you have to have a very understanding husband.
Just in my own experience, if my daughter in particular is the example I always use, it's not just the experience of failure, it's the experience of the possibility. If my daughter ever thought there was any reason that she could be kicked out of my home, it would change the nature of our relationship forever, right? And how open can you be when, if you do the wrong thing, you might get kicked out? How open can you be if I have a real temper tantrum, a full-blown, I'm out of control, I haven't slept for 24 hours kind of temper tantrum,
And then
which none of you have ever had.
Kids
Yeah.
also will tend to, I'm gonna get them before they get me
Exactly.
mentality. I'm gonna push them away, so they don't have the opportunity to push me away. And so a lot of kids will do that as well.
I'm going to be really good at being really bad. Because you don't think I'm good at anything, I'll show you what I'm good at.
So they'll push their boundaries to see how much you really do love them. I'm gonna break curfew, I'm gonna do this. You push and push and push because you wanna see how much they love you and how much they really wanna help you, and then that's when it really goes bad.
My favorite, one of my early kids had a good foster home with a preacher, a reverend in Sacramento, and he decided to assault the reverend in front of the congregation. And it worked. Yeah, it worked. He got kicked out of the home, and I picked him up shortly after that happened because he was coming to our group home, and he was mad. And he said, "What would you do if I hit you?" Well, first I asked him if he wanted to get something to eat. He said no. There's Jim Boy's Tacos in Sacramento. Has anybody ever had Jim Boy's Taco? Okay, right? So I'm in Sacramento picking him up. I want Jim Boy, so. Right? All right, so I said, there's this great place. You want to go? No. She said, all right, we'll go. And we're driving along, and he said, what would you do if I hit you? I said, I would stop the car, wait until you were done. He said, what would you do if I grabbed the steering wheel? I said, I'd stop the car and wait until you're done. He said, well, what do you have to do to get kicked out of Seneca? And I said, you can't really get kicked out of Seneca. And he sulked and he sulked and he sulked, and then he said, can we get something to eat? And it's just classic. Now, don't that. He then tested us over and over again to see if that was the case. But that idea, as incomplete as it was in the context of just a group home, I continue to believe it's powerful.
So we have, I can't believe that it's already almost 7:30. We have about 4 more questions, so let's go these quick. So, Wendy, and 2,
Mine is one word. So it's not a good last question. Should I go now?
We'll go Wendy then. Yeah.
So I worked at Seneca for a long time, but I'm in this class, so I'm not a plant or anything, but I found it striking. I've heard that story before, but I found it exceptionally striking now because it, in a lot of ways, mirrors one of my chosen clients, the one that I hope to someday be sitting here with like you are, came to us at 6 into the group home and was just, we were able to provide RAP, and he's been in our schools, and he's been held in our schools, and our day treatment, and now he's just adopted at 12, which is remarkable, right? Like that is exactly the part of the model that is so amazing, is that we can hold these kids, and came with exact same issues of dissociating for 4 or 5 hours at a time, really troubled, and now he's happy, right? So I think that's great, but I think that's I think that's the model we want for all of our children. I also think there's some threats to that now, and I wonder what you would identify as those threats, and what you, or maybe as far as a journalist, what would we say are the stories that need to be told in order to really get that kind of service for the kids?
There's so much going on right now. Have you guys talked about APSDT at all? Is that, do you guys know what I mean? So the realigning APSDT, which means taking mental health services from funding from the state to the counties, I think is probably one of the most phenomenally bad ideas that we've had in a very, very long time. And it will take apart a system that we've spent the last 5 years building, the last 7 years building. And it's always weird for me to sit here with one of our former kids, because especially the early kids, because there's so much different that I can do now that I could not do. Like, I mean, how many times have I said, you would have never been in a group home?
She would have been adopted.
She would have been adopted. You would have been.
She would have been your story.
Exactly, or, you know,
Yeah.
his client, but.
And there are so many things that I and we can do now that we couldn't even think about doing. I mean, the idea that you should be able to bring intensive services into a foster home. I had to take a legislator staff person to Michigan to convince them that you should be able to do intensive services in a foster home because they had these homes in Michigan, right? And now I can take that same level of intensity and I can provide it any place, right? So that actually lets me look at a child and what they need instead of a system and trying to, and in terms of the threat, all that comes because there's an open funding stream that says we have an obligation to you, we're going to provide these services to you. It's quite conceivable to me that will be irresponsibly implemented.
Okay,
I guess
Figure one
this-
way, I swear.
Real quick, going back to the reports with social workers and whatnot, are the youth allowed to or encouraged to write their own reports so the judge can have something to look at and compare, or is that?
We always do. At least if I find out we did, I mean, we always ask the kids what they want to say to the judge and try to put the kids' view forward. And for the young kids, we ask them to dictate it. So then we'll just write it verbatim, word for word. Tell me exactly what you want to say, or record it. I don't usually record it because that gets dicey, because you don't know where those recordings are going to go. But absolutely, I'm not a big believer in kids before they're 14 or 16 seeing their files because there's so much garbage in them. And I've seen people write very accurately and persuasively about who a kid is, and where I could meet the kid and go, yeah, I recognize you. And I've seen paperwork that when I met the kid bore no resemblance to the kid I met. It's like, are we talking about the same person? So when the kids read that, they look at it and go, oh my God, this is who I am, and this is how they see me. No, this is how one person who didn't spend enough time to know who you were saw you on
a bad day.
I know this in a long time, but you know, I do remember the kind of. This was the worst behavior this kid really did. You have any pictures of them?
Oh, I was trying to bring some.
The most adorable child.
She looks like her kids that are basically.
But for somebody to interpret that as, what were the words you used? Defiant. Oh my God, for a 7-year-old, give me a break, or a 6-year-old. And that's the kind of garbage you see. So I think it's a really mixed bag.
Well, I'm glad I read one of my reports before it got sent out. I think I was in the 9th grade, and the report stated that I had brought a knife to school, that I had brought alcohol to school, and thank God I read that, because not only was that not true, it was going to go into the system as that was me. So I was able to read it over with Richard and have them fix it, because God knows, what if it was, written in there, that's who the system was going to see me. And if I was going to be placed into another home, they're going to be warned, she's an alcoholic, she takes weapons to school. So I think it might be a case by case, let them read at their age, but really they need to have access to that. They need to be able to see what's being written about them, because it's their life that's being written. It's nobody else's life, it's their life. They should have some control over what's being written about them and what's happening to them.
No,
The kids
I
need a
agree
little
with you.
bit more
It's a
power.
question of when, at what age.
Right, because not every 12-year-old is, at the same level as the other 12-year-old or the 14-year-old. But I believe the kids need a little bit more power. I don't know how they, what the system is now, but they need to have some influence in their life and where that, direction of everything's going.
But just to give you an example, there was a local doc who was diagnosing kids at less than 3, but often 3 to 4 years old, with bipolar disorder. And first of all, kids who are 2.5 to 3.5, have bipolar disorder by definition. Right? How do you make that diagnosis? Right, exactly. Some little mellow kid, right? That's just wrong. How do you make that kind of a diagnostic call? And people in the field finally reacted to it, but it took a while. And during that time, they were putting kids on medication, powerful medication for bipolar disorder. That I would, if that were my kid, I would protect them from any thought that they might have bipolar disorder until it was very, very clear that we knew what was going on with them. Because you get that. If I put that thought in my 10-year-old hypochondriacal boy, he'd be on the internet, oh God, Dad, I have bipolar disorder, and he'd start acting out in weird ways, you know. I'm sorry, I want to shelter him a little bit. I don't want them to be exposed to the people who don't really know who they are. I'm dying to know that.
That's just, back to Melanie. Melanie, you had a question that kind of hinged on this idea of should we put funds towards preventative services, right? So it's and like what I see, and I was just down in LA, and with this congressional foster care caucus in LA, and the whole conversation is essentially about waivers or not waivers, and to me it feels like a very either-or conversation. And so everything's been reduced down to either-or. Like we don't think we can really do it. We'll do either we'll have okay foster care with no real prevention, or we'll have prevention with some really crappy foster care on the back end. So, if we're in a position where we could find the one story that could elucidate that this is becoming an either-or debate, do you see one story that would do that in around us here right now?
You want to turn the camera on? Yeah, I'll talk with you about it.
Okay.
I see a lot of them. And I see everybody in the blocks poised for real and poised for the waiver. So even the way LA and Alameda have implemented the FOIA waiver have been very different and very uneven. The problem with the way we're thinking about the system right now is if you say, what's better, bad group care or no group care? That is really easy for me. I would rather have no group homes in the state of California than bad group homes. Because bad group homes are horrendous, and good group homes are challenging. I think we were fairly good, and I don't think you had a very good experience.
She was very young.
Well, after I left Seneca, I was placed in state foster home in Oakland. I had a horrible experience there. So I didn't really experience the Seneca foster home because I was too little to really remember. But a state foster home was absolutely horrible. Horrible.
And I think, any of you have kids? Kids in this group? Well, just
You're the one parent, she's already out.
Too bad. Well, if somebody said to me as a first choice, there's a circumstance I would place my kid in residential treatment. But if somebody said to me as the first or second choice, I want you to take your boy or your girl, and I want you to put him in a place with 6 profoundly troubled children, it's almost never going to be my first choice. I'd have to be really scared before I would do that. And so it's almost never my first choice for our kids. And there's a place where I am scared enough. I got a 12-year-old that's out stealing cars and driving all over Oakland. I want that boy locked up because he's going to kill himself and he's going to kill somebody else, right? I'm okay with that under those circumstances. I want to figure out why. And by the way, guess where he's driving to? Anybody want to guess?
Girlfriends.
No. His mom's got a terrible substance abuse problem. Probably he's trying to find her and take care of her. Because that's what he's done since he was 6 years old. Right? I'm sorry. But that's, in that circumstance, sorry. In that circumstance, yeah, I would if it were my own boy. If I can't keep him from stealing the car, I'm gonna find a way to keep them safe, right?
Have you ever kicked a kid out of Seneca?
Have I ever?
Kicked a kid out of Seneca?
Yes. And I can tell you every one of them. I had a kid who I really thought was gonna kill one of my staff. He actually was over a staff person with the state, and I had a kid who sexually assaulted one of my staff. So there's a place where it becomes so dangerous that, but I have 1,000 employees and I serve kids all over the state, and it's still my expectation that before we kick a kid out, that comes to me. Yeah, we failed. And even then, it's like, okay, if I had a lockable place where I could staff them all one-to-one, and I had certain, the idea is what do you have to do in each case to create a safe setting? So if I didn't have to have that kid with other kids and I could have staffed him in a way that I could have kept the staff safe, I would have kept him. So yeah, it's rare, but it does happen, and it happens. Now that we're in public schools, it happens more because the public school system is much less tolerant.
I have to run, but you guys can finish up. I gotta do my, I'll be right back. I'll be right back. But yeah, anyway, nice to see you. Thank you very much. I'll be right back, guys. You guys can finish up. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for your questions tonight. And thank you so much for being so open and so honest with us. It really is quite amazing to hear about it from the first person stance, and from also, like I said, we have almost every level here of what goes on, who this affects, who cares about it, what they think about it. And I know I've myself worked at Seneca, and I'm moved to hear about the work and to hear about the challenges and the impact it has on many people's lives. So I think I can speak for many folks here that we really appreciate you guys coming.
Thank you for having us.